It's an absolute honor to welcome George Church to our virtual summit. Few people have shaped both science and the entrepreneurship landscape of our field as profoundly as he has. So, George, you've worn so many hats: scientist, mentor, entrepreneur. You've been at the cover of Time magazine. I just wanted to take a step back for a second. What first motivated you to take on like scientific discoveries beyond the lab and into building companies?
Yeah, so I guess it started fairly early in as a as a graduate student. I developed some software for sequence reading, about 7 years too early, and but Biorad, which many of you have heard of for supplies and equipment, got wind of it, and I started consulting for them in Philadelphia. So I would commute from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Philadelphia. And we almost brought out an automated sequencing device, thanks to John West was the main engineer that I was working with on that. He went on to do both ABI and Selects, the two major categories at the time that he did them. But at the time, he didn't know much about sequencing or biochemistry. He was a laser jock. And anyway, so that was my first experience. Then the second one, I was one of the first employees at Biogen. Wally Gilbert was my advisor, and he co-founded Biogen. And and then it just basically stuck from there. I just my during my postdoc and my starting up my assistant professor lab back at Harvard, that was the first. It just seemed like in order to get technology at least out into the world, it wasn't sufficient just to write a little paper about it. You had to actually work at it. So that's what I did.
Fantastic. It's thank you for sharing your journey. It's like super critical for all of like the young entrepreneurs and graduate students as well to hear how you have started, right? Because it's not every day where we get to hear from George Church talk about like his important like journey and all the formative experiences they've had as well. So, George, I wanted to ask you, and then I'm also very, very curious myself. Can you help us unpack the church lab model? So, like in your mind, what key variables and practices in your lab environment foster such an entrepreneurial mindset? What's like the secret sauce behind all the like the company creation that has gone through your lab?
Yeah. So um, I think some of the key things are that technology, as a as one way of going into entrepreneurship. There are lots of other ways. You can have a biological discovery or some kind of administrative insight. But mine is technology, and I think encouraging myself and the people around me to try a lot of things that might fail. But if you try a lot of them and one or two succeed, it's almost as if you tried one specific thing that has succeeded. The difference is that if you insist on getting that one thing right, it tends to be a little more incremental. And if you have fear of failure, so the idea is not to fail, but it's to try a lot of things. And so, for example, when we do a library screen, that's something that we helped develop synthetic chemistry for in the, turn of the millennium. That the premise of that is you're going to try a million things, and most of them one of them is going to be better than the rest, and that's intrinsically better than, I think, in general, trying one thing. So that also feeds into the entrepreneurship attitude. Um, and then encouraging people to be open. I mean, not necessarily open about all your trade secrets, but being open enough. Having patents are a way of being open. You can literally have open source. The Personal Genome Project is one of the most open sourced things in human genomics at the time, and still. Uh, and there are many other components of it that we may get to later on in this chat.
100%. And I love the first two things that you shared, like being willing to like to fail, to try new things, and then of course openness within innovation as well. I think those are like really one of the two major drivers of from like a mindset perspective of like allowing people to like reach beyond and then to like really push the boundaries of what we can do. And like that to me is like super exciting. And I'm like I wanted to thank you like for sharing that. Like, like that's awesome. So from your experience and just like digging deeper into this, like what mindset shifts do you think are like the most important beyond the two things that I've shared? That they transition from like research to company building, and what strategies have you seen help them succeed in that transition?
Transitioning from academic to entrepreneurial commercial is basically not starting when it's too early. You can really mess that up. You can have either have trouble raising money, which or getting diluted out. You raise the money and then you don't then you have need more money and more and before you can get anything that's usable. So timing is you wait until it's quite clear that it's ripe. I think another thing that helps is having realistic expectations of the differences. There are some, an early startup will have a lot of things in common. It'll feel like the excitement of being in an academic lab, maybe even more exciting. But you need to be realistic. There will be a time where your investors will make demands. It's not like you have no boss. It's that you have maybe a little more freedom, a little more resources than you might have as a postdoc or an assistant professor. But you need to be realistic that you have to produce a product that's attractive in some way. It doesn't necessarily have to cure a specific disease. There's a whole variety of ways, but you need to think about all those ways and choose carefully. Those are some of the thoughts that happened during the transition.
Yeah, I wanted to unpack that ever so slightly. Um, like what's like the mindset behind, or at least like the process of like figuring out like the best ideas. Like that's something that I've always been like really curious about, because like there's plenty of ideas out there. Let's say you could start with 100. How do you distill them to like let's say the top 10% that like would have like commercial viability? Like how do you yeah, like what goes on like behind the scenes there?
Well, there's behind the scenes for two different people. I mean, one is me who's trying to, create kind of a long-term portfolio. And then there's the individual postdoc or small group of postdocs that have just invented something. And they really have kind of one thing that they're focused on, which is when or if that one thing will be ready. Okay. In my case, starting from way back, I decided I would bridge between academia and entrepreneurship commercial and not quit my day job, because in my day job I can train a lot of people. I can launch disparate companies that only have in common like having come out of my lab. And in that case, I can I have more options and more decisions that you're asking about, like how do we find things that look like they're nearly impossible or useless, which almost everything that we've done has been accused of one or both of those at one point or another. But how do you find those things that look that way, but actually are easier than they look? Partly they're easier than they look because we happen to have access to technologies that other people don't trust yet. We trust them because we developed them. We know what their limitations are. Or we simply have some other insight that has to do with exponential technologies, for example. So it's not necessarily our technology; it's the whole field is exponential, and people don't fully realize that what that is, and so forth. So anyway, those are some of the different viewpoints of somebody who's got one hammer that they want to use for all the nails. The starting a postdoc, a couple of postdocs that want to go off and launch, and the different viewpoint you have when you start when you started a lot of companies, and you want each one to have to be able to distinguish itself from the. You want to make it easy for those postdocs to distinguish themselves and not be in some hyper competitive losing proposition.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that mindset and behind what the decision making process is and all that stuff. We have multiple questions in the Q&A portion. Actually, I'm gonna slowly go through them. Um, Here's a pretty good one. Um, so George, can you expand the idea into a more global model, where other professors can get training from him and be able to replicate your own model as well into their own lab. So just think about scaling the George Church lab environments so that other labs could also have a similar energy of entrepreneurship.
Well, I think I genuinely hope that is the case, and I think some of my students have become professors. Jay Shinduri, Kun Zhang, Peter Kochenkov, and so forth, and they, it's their choice as to how close they want to be to the model that they got their PhD, MD, and postdoc, and that's one way. The other way is the companies themselves can continue to they can spin off. They can be serial entrepreneurship within the companies. I'm not sure that answers your question, but those are a couple of thoughts.
Yep. To those in the chat, 100% encourage you to do follow-up questions as well if needed. And then we'll address them as we go through. Um, George, there's also another question as well. Um, what do you think are the most important or inevitable steps to develop an idea to its full realization? So I guess going into the nitty-gritty, other than the idea which we've already touched upon and the process behind that, but what about finding team members, finding a mentor? What do you think comes first after you've had the initial idea?
Yeah, these are incredibly important. If you pick some toxic team member as your first hire or first partnership, it could really mess things up for subsequent hires and investments and so forth. So choose carefully. One advantage of launching out of a fairly large laboratory is you've had lots of different people to choose from. You've kind of organically come together. There's nothing forcing you to work with anybody in the lab. And so then when you launch with this little bolus of people. So for example, when Luhan Yang helped me co-found geneticist, a transplant company, pig to human transplant, she took 9 people with her. And she knew she could trust those people. She didn't have to train them. They were already trained. She didn't have to develop exotic human resources and so forth. They just started working on day one, and it really went quickly. So that's one thing that can help make that pathway. If you don't have that opportunity, then you just have the postdoc, whether the postdoc wants to be CEO or not, they're effectively CEO until they choose one, and they're going to have to do that themselves, at least for a while. So yeah, I think uh, personnel and initial messaging, what your slide deck looks like. These are things that really require a lot of personal attention. Don't you can't yet delegate it to AI or to some CRO or something like that. It's really this is and you should do this, some of this at least, in that transition between academic and entrepreneur before you actually start taking investors. Is the time to get that straight. Because as soon as you get investors, then you've made promises.
Definitely get to put in the work, leveraging network, figuring out who's around you, who has the unique skill sets that are most important, most pertinent. Of course, slide deck. Um, can't delegate that yet. Also, definitely find people that can complement you on that. Um, George, we have a really great question as well, and something also I'm personally curious about. Um, do you think early career scientists who want to join or co-build startups benefit from first spending time in large pharma or corporate settings to bring the knowledge back? Is it better to say to close? Is it better to stay close to the startup world?
I think this varies with person, and with opportunity. I think in general, the big pharma world is so different that you don't really learn that much from it. But you might get connections though, that where you can make a deal with them. They know you because you were an employee, or that could work against you. They know you as an employee, and they felt that you weren't suited for their company, or who knows what. But I think that you can make those deals just fine without ever have been in for example, Eric Kelsick had no experience as a CEO when we co-founded Dino Therapeutic, but he immediately went out and made some big deals that had milestones. I mean, they weren't just based on faith, but the big pharma was responding positively to his message that we could use AI and multiplex libraries to find AAV capsids with novel properties, different, in particular targeting with different tissues. So you could use lower doses, less toxicity, and still get efficient delivery to say retina or brain or muscles, whatever have you. So I think the important thing was they're having good ideas rather than necessarily having lots of connections in big pharma. I mean, the most you're going to develop is one or two such connections. While once you have a product that's beguiling, then you can talk to as many people as, I mean, you have doors are opened by that method rather than by having spent time in big pharma.
Thank you for answering that, George. That's really key takeaway here of focusing on the idea, and then the rest will take care of itself from there. I want to ask a question on the flip side of the entrepreneurial journey, as well, George. Um, People are very, very interested about the risks that graduate students and postdocs that should be aware when starting the entrepreneurship journey.
Well, risks. We've mentioned a few. The risks of getting the wrong people at the beginning, the risks that investors, timing won't be good, or investors don't see what you see. They don't see the vision that you see. There are, there are risks of just the same kind of risks that young assistant professors will have. Is that or equivalent ones that you won't get grants as assistant professor. You won't get. You can also apply for grants as an entrepreneur, SBIR grants, for example. There can be changes in federal policy. I mean, I know that seems like a bizarre idea that federal policy would affect uh, young people, but it does, and uh, and so forth. There's no shortage of risks, but it's not clear that the alternatives have fewer risks. I mean, that's the main thing. It's not, you're not looking for zero risk, you're looking for low alternative risks. Low risk relative to the alternative.
George, I think you muted yourself.
Yes, intentionally, I had to cough.
No, okay. Just wanted to make sure you're okay there.
Well, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for addressing the question. And people definitely very, very interested in like risks as well, right? Like it's awesome to be on the journey, but it's also nice to know what to look out for. That way you could be best prepared with what comes next. Um, there's also a question regarding um, like the investor side of the conversation now as well. Um, how do you balance like the sometimes like diverging pressures, right? Of like what the CEO or like the graduate student that's leading the company or idea should focus scientifically versus what like the VCs or what the overall market pressures might be exerting on like your company.
Well, you do have to pay attention to market pressures. On occasion, um, a brilliant young entrepreneur will think of something for which there is no market. Um, Conventional wisdom is to go after markets that already exist rather than try to create one. But every now and then it happens, and you should keep that in mind. And there are other cases where, fortunately, both the governmental supports and investor supports and contract money that can come in, which is non-dilutive, are diverse. I mean, there's a lot of different things, and you can see an opportunity that maybe other people don't see. They there was a grant announcement that nobody noticed, or there was, a type of product that people didn't think was that anybody would buy, and you see that. So you have to look at that. Fortunately, in our country in particular, but worldwide, there's a diversity of opportunities, and you just need to poke through them and see which ones fit and which ones are real.
It's definitely a challenge how to narrow down like which idea or like which horse is gonna end up like winning the race, right? Like
Or
that's
horses, plural. I mean, there's
oh,
lots of
that's
ways
right.
to win. Fortunately, yeah, fortunately.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely more than one option. And maybe like like the element of flexibility is also there, right? Like multiple ideas, figure out which idea like really pushes
Now, there will
forward
be
from
some
there.
pressure. You were asking about the what's at odds here. There will be a little pressure from certain investors, in fact, many of them, to focus. That will be the main thing. And it's exactly the same advice you get as an assistant professor from your elders and the granting agencies is, focus, young person. Um, and sometimes you give in to that, and sometimes you don't. So, for example, Francois Vignon, he was one of my first entrepreneur CEOs, that he formed Ab Vitro, which was later sold to Juno and Celgene, and his advisors, not me, but other investors, said, "Look, you have to decide whether you're a antibody diagnostic company or whether you're an immune therapeutics company." And he says, "No, I don't think so. I don't think I need to choose just yet." And he kept both the diagnostic therapeutics going, really all the way up until he was acquired at a very high valuation. So you don't have to listen to every shred of advice that you get, either from your formal advisors, your paid advisors, or nor from investors that haven't invested yet or that have invested.
I want to dig deeper into that as well. At least from your side, George. Where do you get your ideas? Where like what inspires you for like pursuing like any particular like company model or company idea that like you would love to work on? Like this is something I'm also very, very personally interested, like how your mind works, like how do you really distill that main idea that you want to push forward?
Well, some people think I get my ideas from science fiction, which is not entirely false. Um, some people have claimed, including me, that I get ideas from my narcoleptic episodes where I will fall asleep for a few seconds or a few minutes, unplanned. Certainly, when I have difficult problems, sometimes that will cause me to shut down and I'll wake up with an answer. But neither of those are the full spectrum. I mean, it's also, I think we all get ideas from the environment we've created for ourselves, the people that we surround ourselves with. There's always good advice for to surround yourself with people smarter than you, and don't be so arrogant to think that you're the smartest person in the room, or the most creative, or most out of the box. Just there's no superlative that you need to live by. You should certainly aim for it, that's fine, but you don't need to pat yourself on the back in any moment. So those are all sources of ideas, and you shouldn't reject them just because the NIH not invented here syndrome. In fact, while you're academic and to some extent very early starting, be careful. There's not really an infringement problem. You're not making money. You're not making claims publicly and so forth. You're just doing research, and you're seeing what so that's another source of ideas, is things that have been revealed through publications and patents. Those are good, especially when they're combined with things that you have that are truly novel, and you have some reason to believe that whoever disclosed those ideas either wants to work with you or is dropped out of the field, or you don't want to just, because if you take ideas from somebody that's big and powerful and got lots of momentum, that's usually not a recipe for success. But anyway, there's lots of sources of ideas, analogies, colliding of two new things. If there's two new things that people haven't fully gotten used to yet, and you're the first to realize that they can go together in some way, that's a really great source of ideas. It requires a little more interdisciplinarity than maybe the average person has.
George, when you mentioned you wake up with an idea, that's gotta be like one of your superpowers then, right? Like I don't think a lot of people would be able to like claim that, where you just go to sleep and then oh, all of a sudden have that spark.
Yeah. Yeah. Or sometimes you wake up and you've dropped your test tube on the floor and now you have to start over. So it's definitely not a panacea. Uh,
No, like, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I really loved how you said surrounding yourself with people that are like smarter than you, and then even like challenge you to some degree too, right? To like pursue the best idea, people that you could go through back and forth with. It really speaks to the collaborative nature of like idea making, right? Because like looking from the outside, it's easy to think like one person idea goes through it, overnight success, when in reality, and because like you've shared and unpacked this for us, like it's actually like it takes a whole village, right? With multiple people working together in pursuit of a common goal, like a common idea. And like that's something that really, really like resonated with me. And I really, really wanted to thank you for sharing that. Um, I also wanted to ask one question as well. And then from here, I'll ask like other questions in the chat. But you've been involved in the synthetic biology space. Um, like that's definitely in your resume. I wanted to ask, like, what do you believe will be the most transformative application of SynBio within the next decade?
that's a great question. Synbio, I think there was efforts at the beginning to keep it really narrow. It was like little biological genetic circuits that would simulate computer circuits. That was like one of the narrow definitions, or it might be origins of life, or it might be synthetic genomes with no particular purpose in mind. Just make a genome, particularly small one. But I think since then it's broadened and it's included say the biotech recombinant DNA revolution that gets piled in, even ecological and conservation biology, that's now part of the mix. So to your question, I think some two big things are I think relatively new for synthetic biology and are very promising. One of them is developmental biology. That was not part of the original, maybe little simulations of developmental biology where you take a bacteria and have it make rings of color or something. But I mean, real where you can make very complicated organs or organisms. You're taking advantage of the fact that biology very easily handles atomic precision and it also handles scale simultaneously. You can have really high density of energy consuming processes that work because you have vascularization, either plant or animal vasculature that brings in good stuff and takes out the bad stuff. So that's a whole. You can think of it as a 3D printing method where the rules are not as simple as moving around in X, Y, and Z and dropping a blob of plastic. They're more complicated than that, but they're also more easy. Once you handle the first layer, then there's a lot that's handled for you by the biology, the genetics, the developmental biology. And then the second thing is artificial intelligence. I mean, this goes without saying, AI is helping everything, but I think the marriage of AI with synthetic libraries is more powerful than either one of them alone. Because if you make a random synthetic library, most of them die and don't function at all. But if you use AI to design the library, you can't just design the perfect thing yet. But if you design a library, then there's very high chance that in that million, let's say million viruses that you inject into a primate, you can find the one that's the best at targeting the brain or targeting the liver or what have you, or detargeting the liver if you're getting too much of that, lowering the toxicity and so on. So I think that combination is probably the biggest success of AI so far, maybe even bigger than its success in natural language processing. So I think those are two things to keep your eye on, but there are many, many more that it's a very, they're almost the definition of exponential technologies is computing and synthetic biology.
Those two would absolutely be a fantastic combination. I like how you said like those two together just absolute like they need each other in a way. Like you need synthetic biology, you need the computing power as well, and then like the next advancements will likely just be accelerated through the computing power, and of course with the help of AI at the same time. It makes me really, really excited about the next decade of like technologies, the next decade of like applications that these technologies will bring about for like the next like patients and next important problems that scientists would love to tackle. All right, George, I have about two questions left. I'm going to ask you one, the first critical one. Is that fish tank behind you, or is that a Zoom background? People got really, really interested about the fish.
I have a 20,000 liter koi pond right here on my property, and that's a drone camera, underwater camera. Yeah,
Wow. Um, Man, I've worked with koi fish for some time
I
during like
thought
the earlier
it
days.
kind of looks like they're on fire, so it's kind of fit in with the fireside chat thing. It's just the way that the sun is hitting them. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, like these guys are like so majestic. And they're so peaceful as well, right? Like I
Yes.
enjoy looking at them whenever I go through like my parents' koi ponds or like
Yeah.
other koi ponds.
Maybe we should start up a company to sell koi videos.
You know?
Yeah.
Not a bad idea there, George. All right. On a more serious note, like one like final question I wanted to ask, but do you have any like to all of like the young scientists out there, like the aspiring entrepreneurs, or even those that are in the thick of it, in the middle of it right now. Do you have any words of inspiration, final thoughts, like things that you would like to say to like the future of like of innovation?
Well, there's so much to say, and I don't know what you can crunch down into a final word, but it's don't assume that any path toward or away from entrepreneurship is going to be easy, but it's usually not going to be fatal either. So just need to have a little faith in yourself and the people around you. Choose your colleagues well, and support them once you have chosen them. Give them 101% support, and stay nimble, which is one of the toughest decisions will be when you drop something that has been your passion, right? I'm not saying drop it quickly. I'm not saying, like, just flip from flower to flower without focusing. But at some point, you may have to make a really tough decision, to downsize your company or to change from diagnostics to therapeutics or who knows. And that's going to be a very tough decision. You want to get a lot of advice, listen to it, but not blindly. If you choose, I didn't used to encourage young postdocs that have no business experience to go into, C-level, CEO in particular. But now I've noticed a lot of my postdocs have done quite well as CEOs, and so I'm less opinionated about that. I think it might actually, but you really have to decide whether it's for you, and if it's not, then get somebody else in as soon as possible.
Thank you for those words of wisdom, George. I wanted to ask a couple follow-ups since we have like a few minutes, like still in the fireside chat. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned surrounding yourself with like great colleagues, and then creating a support network from there. Can you talk a little bit more about what does support like look like, beyond just like a sounding board? But what are ways that like people can support aspiring entrepreneurs, like other than being involved with the Nucleate program? What are ways that we can support entrepreneurs as they push forward with their journey?
Well, yeah, support can range from um, financial to ideas about finance to ideas about science or on so forth. They can be psychological. They can just they can be people that live through similar things. A particular, say, bias that you have to face and face down. Uh, they can be support via introductions. You know, people that you have you sent them a bunch of emails and you got no response, and so you go through an intermediary. Support can be just some non-obvious insight, that comes from, saying being really young and being in tune with the zeitgeist, or being really old and having seen a bunch of stuff before. There's just so many ways you can be supportive, but I think the main one is you need to care, you need to empathize. Now that's not the only way to succeed in the world. There are plenty of people without empathy that play their part in the village, as you say. But it is nice if you can add empathy to your collection of things you do that you're good at, and that you can provide support for other people.
I love that, George. I loved how you focused on all of the different aspects that people could support aspiring entrepreneurs, right? Beyond just the financials, the knowledge, but the psychological aspect of it too. It can be a very lonely journey, right? Like sometimes you feel that it's just you, you're the only one that truly cares. When in reality, there's so many people around you, right, that you could work together on. that could help facilitate conversations, that could help bring in like introductions and like bring in the key resources you need to move forward. And that's something that I think it's beautiful, right? It's not
Thank you.
necessarily an I like a very solitary like type of like journey or like career path, right? There's like actually more to it, like behind the scenes.
Yeah.
All right, we have about 3 minutes or so left, George. I wanted to ask this like one question regarding like the day in the life of like Church, if possible. What's your daily routine look like nowadays? I'm sure you're super busy. Other than being a part of like fantastic fireside chats and doing this and being in like multiple boards of different companies, what's like George Church, like what does your day-to-day routine look like?
Um, yeah, well, the my favorite part of the day is when I wake up. I wake up completely jazzed. I don't need coffee or anything. I'm just wide awake immediately. Usually in the wee hours of the morning, and I don't have to do anything. I'm not interacting with any person or anything for a while, and so that gives me a lot of time to think, and in some cases to catch up with getting if I get behind, which I try not to. And then the rest, then there's a big chunk of time where I'm interacting with mostly people in my lab. Sometimes people, visitors that come from out of town, but they're basically one-on-one conversations or one-on two, three, small, very very small groups. And that's a time. It's a time of science. I mean, it's a time for the most part where we can brainstorm, we can debug experiments, we can debug engineering and business models and things like that. But it really is focused on the science. That's kind of the middle of the day. And then there's a lot of diversity at the end of the day. Sometimes there's events and sometimes but usually I try to keep it low because my functioning starts to tail off after I eat a meal, for example. So I try not to eat any meals during the day at all. Not for health reasons, which some people will claim fasting is a health thing, but it's mainly because it will send me into narcolepsy pretty high frequency probability. So anyway, that's a short version of the day. And of course, days, that's kind of a typical day. There are a lot of non-typical days where I might have like three talks in one day or no talks so it's a little less hectic than it used to be. You said that, it's busy. I am very busy, but I'm not spending 48 hours doing a round trip 12 time zones away, uh, for some token appearance, which could be accomplished much more effectively and cost effectively by a Zoom meeting, which I love Zoom. It was one of the few gifts that we got from COVID-19, I think, was people taking seriously the fact that you can do video conference. So that was terrific, and has been. So it's given me three or four times the time to do science without being cut off. And airplanes can be pretty lonely. Speaking of lonely, yeah.
George, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being a part of this fireside chat. There's so many questions. I'm sure people will follow up with you. But on behalf of like the Nucleate community and the Nucleate leadership team, I just want to thank you for being such a great mentor, great supporter, and such a fantastic fireside chat. Um, and with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for your attention, for your time, and I hope you're ready for like the next set of programming. I'm gonna hand it off to my colleague Daniel. Thanks so much, George.
Yeah. Thank you. Go Nucleate.
Go Nucleate.
Yeah.